All right, take four. This is a review, basically. It's me reviewing the review of the book Superior: The Return of Race Science by Angela Saini. The review is carried out or written by Alok Jha. First thing I would say is that both of these bozos don't come at this with anything short of massive bias. Both of them, I'm sure, consider themselves to be people of color and minorities and basically put upon by the rest of society. I think it's rubbish. I don't know anybody who gives a damn about anybody's skin color. I don't care either. Who cares? I mean, why would I give a damn? But anyway, these morons basically, as far as from reading the article, you get the feeling basically it's like the Boston Red Sox versus the New York Yankees, and these guys are on the Boston Red Sox team, and they're writing a book alleging various sins upon the New York Yankees. what kind of bias do you think you're going to get on such a topic from the people who actually play for the Red Sox? Anyway, let's see. This is an urgent, important book. It contains a warning. You thought racism might be on its way out of science? That the arc of society bending towards more progressive, tolerant values had long banished the scientific search for ways in which one grouping of people is inherently more talented, clever, or physically able than another? You thought wrong. And then race is a relatively recent concept. I didn't go through this whole article, but I would more or less agree. I mean, my own experience with race would be, well, when it comes to writing, for example, doing research. Well, I mean, okay, let's say first of all, I grew up in 6 countries. Where did I see massive racism? Let's see, in Ireland? No. Scotland? No. Nigeria? No. Uganda? No. America? No. Canada? No. Never saw it. That was back in the 70s. And 80s. I never saw it, but all of a sudden, racism is everywhere. Oh my God! Come on, fuck off, really? Half my immediate family is black. If there was a lot of racism around, I would have seen it throughout my childhood. Didn't see it. It wasn't there. Anyway, okay. Oh yeah, race is a relatively recent concept. Well, to that I would say, when I was writing my book about the Opium Wars, one of the things I noticed was that there was no racism apparent in the books. Basically, all the British, when they went over to China, they were all very impressed. I mean, the Chinese could read and write. They sat on furniture, didn't sit on the ground. They know how to cook. They value education. They value the rule of law. They're basically non-violent. They're proud of who they were. They didn't look up to the English or anything like that. They were like, if anything, they looked down upon the English. I mean, I remember one story, for example. A guy was relating that I think it was the third governor of Hong Kong was saying that before the war, for example, it was notoriously difficult to get a taxi. Before, well, they used to travel by sedan chairs. Basically, you'd have a couple of what they used to call back in the day coolies, which is in Chinese is coolie. Coolie is like difficult, and li is labor. So it's just a hard, serious blue collar labor. That's all coolie means in Chinese. Anyway, so it's being pulled by a couple of coolie. And the governor to be said that back in the day, he said it was really difficult to get one. And he said even beggars would actually, well, that's even better. It wasn't guys in sampans in sedan chairs. It was beggars that he was talking about. I'm sorry. He was saying that beggars would not take alms, would not beg alms from foreigners because that was considered to be foreigners it was considered to be too kind of demeaning. Foreigners are like too low in the social scale. I mean, I'm not taking anything about a foreigner. God, that would be embarrassing, humiliating. And he said only when the Chinese weren't around would the Chinese beggars actually solicit anything from you, because the beggars are too embarrassed. You know what I'm saying? Chinese are they're very proud of who they were, and they didn't take any guff from anybody. Anyway, to get back to this, the racism thing. The racism starts to appear when you see foreigners talking about China, maybe in the 1880s, 1890s. I remember seeing stuff in the 1890s for sure. Just stuff written by morons. Just shallop. Somebody, one book in particular, a guy was traveling through, and it's actually twofold, because on the one hand he was knocking. He's saying that the Chinese, when they make this awful yowling noise when they're talking to each other, and you just want to get away from it. It's this kind of really uncivilized screeching when they're talking to each other, and the music is just cacophonous and all the rest of it. But at the same time, in the same book, the guy gets bullied by local people. Not in a, they don't like beat him or anything, but like kids would set firecrackers underneath his before his horse and scare his horse. His horse would go like running off and around. They do shit. It'd be like Chinese Bart Simpsons. And people would be making jokes at his expense. They'd be crowding around him, saying, "Oh, look at the foreigner! Look at his big nose! What's that crazy beard he's got?" And it just drove him nuts. So, okay, he resorted to racist terms when he was describing them, but obviously they didn't feel inferior to him at all. This is just a regular run of the mill people, and he was really put off by the fact that they were not at all intimidated in any way, shape, or form by him. And this is the thing. I mean, did the average Indian have an inferiority complex in dealing with English back in the 19th century? I doubt it. Maybe in the 20th century, when the technological disparity began to really take off. Okay, then you have new generations of people who don't realize that their grandfathers were basically were basically equal in terms of social status. I mean, the English back in the 1820s, this kind of a thing, they went native in India all the time. They'd wear Indian clothes, eat Indian food, take Indian wives, travel in Indian style, elephants and whatnot. So again, yeah, it's true that this whole racism thing is a relatively recent concept, as far as I can tell as well. That's true. Actually, despite the fact that I was ragging on the author here, I do kind of agree with this bit. The beginnings of race science seem to emerge with the Victorian frenzy for categorizing life. Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus, who developed the now familiar binomial nomenclature to classify living things, Homo sapiens, for example. It's a binomial, two names. Homo is the first name, sapiens is the second. Bi means two as a bicycle, binomial. Was among the first to start categorizing humans in a way that we might call racial. By the way, the reason I defined binomial wasn't because I didn't think you knew what it meant, it's because I had to remind myself what it meant, because I forgot. Anyway, I do that a lot, where I pretend to teach people stuff when it's actually myself that I'm teaching. Anyway, Linnaeus laid out 4 categories in 1758 that corresponded to the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa, recognizable by the supposed characteristic colors, red, white, yellow, and black. To which I would add, the ancient Egyptians did the same thing. The ancient Egyptians categorized people into 4 groups as well. They were the sub-Saharan blacks. Here's another way to look at it. They were the West Africa blacks, the East Africa blacks, the Mediterranean types, and then there were the blondes and redheads from the north. The blondes and redheads from the north were considered to be barbarians. The Western Africans would be probably quasi-civilized. I mean, because the Egyptians, they were at the top of the heap. So if I remember correctly, the Egyptians would be number 1, and then maybe the West Africans would be down a tier. In the same tier, maybe you would find the Mediterranean types, and the lowlife, the riffraff, were the barbarians in the north, who were pale faces. So that goes back. That's like two, maybe even 4,000 years ago. They were thinking of things in those terms. Anyway, so she continues. A generous person might argue that Linnaeus was just trying to do what taxonomists do. But Sine, or however we pronounce her name, explains that his classifications went further than just appearance. Linnaeus described indigenous Americans not only as having straight black hair and wide nostrils, but also being of a subjugated nature, as if that were their natural state. Maybe, I don't know. Did Linnaeus ever travel to the United States? Well, it wasn't at that time. There was no such thing as the United States. That would be British North America. But did Linnaeus actually even go to the U.S.? So that's kind of a bad example. It's weak, because getting somebody like Linnaeus who's never been to North America and then saying, look, he's obviously racist because he thinks North Americans, the American Indians, are of a subjugated nature. He's not even there. I mean, everything he's working with is secondhand in nature. He's really a poor. What you want to be quoting is somebody in the United States who's looking down their nose at Native Americans, if they are. He further included human subcategories for monster-like and feral people. And when I'm thinking, describing indigenous Americans, both Columbus brought back indigenous Americans to Europe, and so did Captain John Smith? Was it Pocahontas? I need to look that up. Yeah, I mean, it's usually whenever you look at people talking about racism, this kind of thing, this seems to me a very convenient kind of leaving out of things that don't work in favor of their narrative. You see, of course, this all the time, and we all do it, I guess. I'm sure I must do it as well. Pocahontas was, she saved the life of colonist John Smith in 1607, who was being held captive by her tribe. She placed her head upon Smith's head when her father raised his war club to execute him. She was captured and held for ransom during hostilities in 1613 by the colonists. She converted to Christianity, took the name Rebecca. And when the opportunity arose for her to return to her people, she had a case of Stockholm Syndrome and chose to remain with the colonists. She married tobacco planter John Rolfe when she was 17 in April 1614. And they had a child, Thomas Rolfe, in 1615. And here is her picture. I mean, does this look to you like the kind of portrait of somebody who's being looked down upon as being some kind of, quasi-human or something? Right. I mean, obviously this is obviously a flattering portrait. I mean, what? Again, like I was saying about the British serving in India in let's say the late 1700s and the early 1800s, they often went native. They did the same thing, except that if you did a portrait of them, they would be on top of an elephant in Indian garb, with an Indian wife and kids and whatnot. I mean, So again, as usual, I just find all this talk about race issues. Again, let me see. I need to go back to that other page. Where was it? The problem is you have these two people, right, who both figure that they're being, set upon, that they're being discriminated against, and they want, they want revenge in a sense, so they want to push back. And they don't take into account the whole picture. They presume that people who are not, quote-unquote, people of color must be evil and nasty and feral and crazy and whatnot. And it's just complete baloney, and it flies in the face of history. Okay, I mean, here's another example, for example. In India, the practice of burning your wife, burning of the widow after the husband died, was only discontinued by British pressure. The British, it wasn't Sleeman. It was one of these people. Maybe it was Bentek, but one of the people who was in charge in India when the British East India Company said, because he was trying to stamp it out, and he was visited by some Indian nobles, and they said, "Look, this is our tradition. We have the right to continue to carry out our tradition of burning widows to death, to ensure that they don't mess around." Basically, I don't know if they explained this, but I'm presuming that's what it was about. And Bentinck said, "Well, look, you guys have your custom, we have our custom. You follow your custom and burn the widow, and we'll follow our custom of hanging you from a rope across a tree until death. What do you think?" And that's how they stamped it out. There's also something called the Thuggee religion, which is a religion which was based on basically you murdered travelers. They had sacred scarves, and they would strangle people, travelers, particularly business travelers. And they murdered thousands of people every year. And this has been going on for probably 600 years minimum, maybe even 1,000. That was stamped out by Sleeman, who found opposition from, you'll never guess. He found opposition. His leading opposition came from the British East India Company officials, who were like, "You can't mess with their culture. It's their culture, dude." Yeah, these sons of bitches. These what do you call these people? The people who believe in cultural diversity, and every culture is the same as a value, just like every other. It was the same kind of nonsense. They were pitching it, of course, in part saying, "Look, we don't want to disturb local people because we don't want to inspire an uprising or something like that. If we involve ourselves in the local religion, it's going to cause chaos, and there's going to be an insurrection. We're going to have a civil war in our hands." When the moral and courageous thing to do would be, and the intelligent thing to do would be to think, well, wait a minute, why don't we just ask local people, what do you think about this Thuggee business of people being murdered? Do you agree with it? And of course they wouldn't. Yes, how difficult would it be to get on their side, to get on the side of the people who their relatives are being murdered by these fuckers. Unbelievable. But it was a. You can read about it. I don't know if it's on Wikipedia if they mentioned that. But anyway, I'll try to keep this short. Let's see. Okay. Look a little bit here. In an eye-opening section, Saini outlines just how many of the greatest lives of biology are implicated in the gradual accretion of ideas that we would now find unpalatable and unscientific. Yeah, but that's Charles Darwin, Thomas Henry Huxley. Okay, they all had notions about there being a sort of a sliding. What would you call that? There'd be a sliding scale of intelligence that would be found between different races and all the rest of it. These are just people of science, for God's sake. They're just trying to figure out how the world works. They make mistakes. They come up with some smart ideas, come up with some dumb ideas. I mean, You know, and this whole kind of hindsight is 2020. Oh well, they should have known. No, would you have known? What would you have known if you were alive at that time? What would you have been thinking? If you were back in India, you would have belonged to a caste system, Alag Shah, and if this is essentially say Saini, right? You would have been belonged to a caste, and if you'd been Brahmin, you would have believed in the caste, and you would have thought any violation thereof would have been a violation of your most sacred principles, and whatever else, and basically anything short of untouchable, you probably would have been happy with your caste. Who ended the caste system in England, or in India, or who tried to? The British, right? And so you just have this. Again, I don't know their specific views on this, and maybe but there's this holier than thou thing here. It's like, oh my God, even Charles Darwin fell for human categorization. Yeah, well, people did in those days. My favorite writer, H.L. Mencken, he was a racist until about he was 35 or so, right? As far as I can tell, what changed his mind about it was being despised as being German. I mean, I think in New York there was I think it was New York. There was a huge an oil storage area was sabotaged and bombed basically by a couple of German spies, if I remember correctly. It was either it was in Halifax or it was in New York. I think it was in New York. Anyway, and then that was followed by this enormous wave of anti-German wave, and Mencken was of German extraction. And the speaking of German basically was banned in America. The teaching of German was banned in America. There was somebody in government assembled, I think 2,000 American professors, to prove that Germany had not made any contribution of any kind to the furtherance of Western civilization in the previous 500-600 years. It was just total lunacy, right? And I think having to walk in the same shoes basically as African Americans changed, made him say, hey, okay, wait a minute, this is this shit is just wrong. Okay, for what say he became woke, so to speak. I might prefer he became woke on his own, and maybe that was part of it too. I don't know. But anyway, however it worked out, he became woke and he changed. But back in the day, everybody was like this. These two clowns would have been the same as well. The idea that all of us in that day and age, given what people thought they knew about things, that we would have been somehow above and beyond this. Come on, what's the likelihood? It's just narcissism to believe that you would be different. Oh, you're smarter than Charles Darwin. You're smarter than Thomas Henry Huxley. At the time, these are two thought leaders, two social influencers of the highest magnitude. You would have thought, yeah, these two bosses don't know what they're talking about. Look at me, yeah, I'm the smarty. Come on, be serious. Have some humility. Okay, if they bungle it, they bungle it. Fine, people bungle things. It's just the way. But again, this kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, where you're going to condemn people for not knowing what you know today when they couldn't possibly have known then what you know today, because that's 100 fucking years ago. Come on, it's ridiculous. Okay, I'll look at the last chapter and then we'll just wrap this up. There's hardly a better time for this book. What the heck is that? Recent history has brought many of the so-called intellectual racists, Richard Spencer among a rogues gallery of others. Well, this is kind of malarkey too. Richard Spencer is only a thing because the left has made him a thing. I'd never heard of this guy. I'm a libertarian. I'd never heard of this dude until the left made an issue of this guy. Who is he? I don't know. He's a fucking nobody. Who he's really like is he's kind of like a younger version of David Duke. David Duke is kind of the go-to guy whenever you need some kind of KKK guy to hate. You basically, that's how he makes a living. He's made a living as being the cigar store Indian version of the KKK. Basically, you just trot him out. CBS, NBC, ABC, whenever they need somebody to put, we want to, excite the masses. Here's the guy to hate. He comes out, dutifully goes, yeah, blah blah blah. And he says says whatever he's supposed to say. And he writes, and he's a famous guy who's only famous because the media keeps dragging him out in front of the camera. Now they have the same thing with Richard Spencer. The only reason this guy gets any attention whatsoever is because you keep dragging him out, right? I mean, it's kind of like it's like terrorists. I mean, don't we make a point of not publicizing terrorists, of not mentioning their name in the print or on whatever else? So then why are we bringing up this Richard Spencer nobody guy? Why? What does anybody need to know this guy? Because they need somebody to hate. and they need to pretend that there's a real problem. There is no real problem. Richard Spencer. I've never read anything this guy's written. I don't know anybody who pays any attention to this guy. He's a total nobody. Just a manufactured, blackguard from care of the media. Anyway, what else? Yeah, I mean, look at this rubbish. Authoritarian leaders around the world look to people like this, like Richard Spencer. What? Who looks to Richard Spencer? And to their underlying race, and to their okay. Authoritarian leaders around the world look to people like this and to their underlying race scientists to add intellectual ballast to their prejudice on issues ranging from equal equality to immigration. Anyway, and the scientists in scare quotes, because you can't disagree with something. You must go along with whatever's politically correct. So it's politically correct to think one thing today, then you're only a scientist if you agree. And if political correctness changes in 6 months, and you don't fail to keep pace with it, you're not a scientist anymore. This is just childish. This is narcissism. Whether or not research is sound seems to make little difference to white supremacists on the march for power. What white supremacists on the march for power? There's like almost none. It's a nothing movement. I mean, white supremacy was something back in the 1920s, so that was the last time it was a thing. The KKK was destroyed back in the 60s? The 60s to the 80s anyway. It's just totally wiped out. There's no march for power by white supremacists. There's a few fringe people, a few weirdos. Anyway, intellectual racism has always existed, says Saini. It is a toxic little seed at the heart of academia. Come on, I hate this poetry bullshit. You're saying absolutely nothing. There's no useful. It's a metaphor which doesn't illuminate anything. So it's a dead metaphor. You call it a seed at the heart of academia. Well, heart is flesh-based and the seed is plant-based. So one's animal, one's. I mean, it doesn't. If you start to pull apart the metaphor, you see why it doesn't work. Why it's just a sad attempt at poetry. However dead you might think it is, it only needs a little water. You're going to water a seed that's in the heart, a heart which runs on blood. It should be the heart of academia. It should be like a toxic little seed within the groves of academia. You see, if she actually was paying attention to what she was saying, she would say groves, because that's a standard phrase, the groves of academia. And that would work. Seed, groves, plant, right? But this person's just sleepwalking while they're writing the book. Which is why I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to look at it. I'm sure it's crap. Anyway, however dead you might think it is, it only needs a little water. And now it's raining. If it only needs a little water, then now it's raining. Again, you're back so the sea's going to be flooded now, so now it's going to drown. I mean, the person's not paying attention to what they're saying. Anyway, all right, I kind of promised myself I'm going to do a video on everything that I read, just so I get used to talking into the camera and become less self-conscious about it. Anyway, all right, well, I hope I said something useful. See you guys. Bye-bye. Yeah, it took me a while, but I finally found the book I was looking for, the one which referred to which the Egyptians had divided people into like 4 different races, basically. You got the red people, the yellow people, the black people, and the white people. The red people would be the Egyptians themselves, I guess. The yellow would be the Mediterranean folk. Black would refer to the West Africans. And the whites would be the Northern Europeans. But what's interesting, this is I'm looking at is Demetrius's. Let me see his name. Sorry, this is written by Ignatius Donnelly. Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. I've been looking at some stuff from what's his name, Carlson. I always forget his first name. Reggie Carlson, Ralston Carlson, Randall Carlson. God, I can't remember anybody's name. Anyway, this is one of the books he mentioned. This is written in 1882, and it gives you kind of an idea of how people were looking. I guess I'm thinking anyway, because I'm not an expert on how people were thinking about race in the West at that time. But this is 1882, a book for the general reader by Ignatius Donnelly, who's I would presume is expecting the reader to be reasonably well educated. And what he has to say about race, I think, will quite surprise you, just like it surprised me. For example, here you have an illustration of a Choctaw Indian. Okay, it looks reasonably normal. But check out what follows. Neither is the common opinion correct which asserts all the American Indians to be the same type of features. For example, this is again Choctaw Indian. Let's check the next page. The next page, these are people from, these are people who were, the illustration comes from a report of the U.S. Survey for a route for the Pacific Railroad. Check this out. These are Shawnee Indians. Yes, mustaches and hair. I mean, or here, in footnote of page 107 of volume 3 of U.S. Explorations for a Railroad Route to the Pacific Ocean, we are told, many of the Indians of Zuni, New Mexico, are white. They have fair skin, blue eyes, chestnut or auburn hair, and are quite good looking. They claim to be full-blooded Zunians and have no tradition of intermarriage with any foreign race. They are fair-skinned, blue eyes, chestnut or auburn hair. I live in Taiwan, and I remember looking at a book written by somebody who visited Taiwan, I think back in maybe the early 1600s or something. And yeah, he described that there were Caucasians and everything from Caucasians to black people in Taiwan. There were definitely black people because there were black people up until 100 years ago or so. Part of the quote-unquote native population. But I mean, there's people of every description here. Anyway, back to the Indians, the fair-skinned, blue-eyed, auburn-haired Indians. And here we go again. The ancient Indians of California in the latitude of 42 degrees were as black as the Negroes of Guinea, while in Mexico there were tribes of olive or reddish complexion, relatively light. Among the black races of tropical regions, we find generally some light-colored tribes interspersed. These sometimes have light hair and blue eyes. William Penn, writing about the Indians of Pennsylvania, in a letter of August 1683, said the natives are generally tall, straight, well-built, and of singular proportion. They tread strong and clever, and most walk with a lofty chin. So they're proud, they're self-confident. They don't look up to white people. Again, this whole notion that, it's kind of, how would you put it? It's it's not stated, but it's presumed that somehow whites were these lofty kind of master race types that trod the ground. Everybody was kind of scared and intimidated and looking up at them. We have to reverse this situation, this scenario. But this scenario never existed. Like I was saying before, I just don't get the impression at all that until the late Industrial Revolution did anybody look up to people because of your skin color. Nobody cared. Anyway. Again, with regard to the Indians of Pennsylvania, their eyes little and black, not unlike a straight-looked Jew. I have seen among them as comely European-like faces of both sexes as on your side of the sea. And truly an Italian complexion hath not much more of the white in the noses of several of them have as much of the Roman. For their original, I am ready to believe them to be of the Jewish race. You thought they were actually Jewish. You're right. I mean, and this is the thing. I mean, people have this notion that the American Indians all look in a certain way. Like Sitting Bull with a dark complexion, wide kind of Mongolian face, kind of olive eyes. But apparently that was not the case at all. Anyway, check again one more time. The Shawnees. They look like they could be from England or something, or maybe from Spain. Anyway, the point being that it's fine to get these kind of popular science kind of style books where they they treat everything like a melodrama, and there's good guys and bad guys. But history is actually much more interesting if you put down this kind of crap comic book style literature, as in that idiot book that was being reviewed, which I was taking exception to. What's it called again? Oh yeah, Superior: The Return of Race Science. Oh, come on, lady, or guy, or whatever you're freaking left-wing loons. Okay, let's just sum this up with the last paragraph here, this bit here. When science is able to disabuse itself of the Mortonian theory that the Aborigines of America are all red men and all belong to one race, in other words, what he's saying is like the woman who wrote that idiot, I presume who wrote that book, she seems to presume that there's such a thing as a race. I'm guessing. I haven't read the book. I ain't going to read it. I'm not interested in this kind of crap. But I'm just interested in knocking the review. These people think of this kind of race of this, of that, and all the rest of it. That's how I presume they see these things, which is why they feel put upon and all the rest of it. Anyway, back in the 1880s, we have guys saying we've got to give up this crap where we think of people as all belonging to one race and all looking the same, because that's just not true at all. There can be no doubt that the red, white, black, and yellow men have united to form the original population of America. In other words, it was every race that you can think of in the United States. And there can be as little doubt that the entire population of Europe and the south shore of the Mediterranean is a mongrel race. So all Europeans and people in the Mediterranean are mongrels, a combination in varying proportions of dark brown or red race with a white race. The characteristics of the different nations, depending upon the proportions in which the dark and light races are mingled, for peculiar mental and moral characteristics go with these complexions. So there's the idea that the way in which your face and everything kind of comes together is also associated with your behavioral patterns, something which we would not agree with today. But anyway, still, it's a far cry from this whole idea that back in the 1880s people are just racist. It's much, much more complicated than that. The red-haired people are a distinct variety of the white stock. There were once whole tribes and nations with this color of hair. Their blood is now intermingled with all the races of men from Palestine to Iceland. Everything in Europe speaks of vast periods of time and long continued and constant interfusion of blood, so Europe is just basically, like you were saying, is this vast mongrel area where everybody's just a mixture of everything. Until there is not a fair-skinned man on the continent that is not the blood of the dark-haired race in his veins, nor scarcely a dark-skinned man that is not lighter in hue from intermixture with the white stock. Right? I'm not at all surprised. I mean, it's interesting to see this. I didn't see somebody writing this in this particular way, but again, the Victorians are really clever people, as you would expect. They're people. People are clever in every century. And the idea that is you can just look back in the 19th century, everybody's saying, dropping N-bombs or whatever else. It's just beyond childish. It's this cartoon version of the universe. Anyway, I hope I've made the point. And anyway, I haven't worn out my pay. I haven't beaten a dead horse on this for too long. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Bye bye.